Real-Time 1960s presents Evening Report, a complete roundup of today's news with Joe Rubenstein.
Good evening. In New York City, Malcolm X is assassinated. In Washington, Barry Goldwater speaks out on Vietnam. In Los Angeles, Patricia Neal is in critical condition. The Celtics continue to roll, and Stan Laurel is dead. Those are the headlines. The details after this message.
By beach nut, by gum, by beach nut, by gum. The flavor starts lively,
the flavor stays lively.
By beach nut, by gum.
More flavor to chew, more flavors to choose. Like regular spearmint, or the newest, coolest spearmint, new Beech Nut Frosty Mint Gum. There's Frosty Mint flavor in it, there's more Frosty Mint flavor on it, in each minty green swirl. For flavor that starts lively, stays lively, buy Beech Nut, buy gum.
More flavor to choose, more flavors to choose. The flavor starts lively,
The flavor stays lively.
by gum.
More flavor to choose,
More flavors to choose.
the flavor starts lively.
The flavor stays lively,
The flavor starts lively.
the flavor stays lively. By beach nut, by beach nut, by beach nut, by gum.
On Sunday, Malcolm X, the 39-year-old black nationalist leader, was shot to death as he began a speech to a rally of his followers at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights. One man, Thomas Hagen, reportedly a member of the Nation of Islam, was arrested immediately after the shooting, but 2 to 4 other men are believed to have taken part in what was described as a well-planned conspiracy. 1 week before the shooting, Malcolm X, his wife Betty, and their 4 daughters had escaped without injury when a firebomb was hurled into the Queen's home they occupied, but which the black Muslims claimed to own. The following day, Malcolm X addressed a rally at the Audubon Ballroom, where he was to die 6 days later.
Yes, I do believe there'll be further attempts on my life. I know them. They're foaming at the mouth. The rank and file Muslim means well. It's those at the hierarchy who are living off the fatted calf who don't mean well. And this coming Sunday at 2 o'clock, our program will be unfolded. Elijah Muhammad knows he has done some good things, and he has done some bad things. He knows that if he had wanted to, he could have united our people with the Muslim world just by teaching the right religion of Islam. He could have done so. The entire Muslim world would have accepted him. As it is now, the Muslim world has rejected him. He can never go into the Muslim world saying that he's a prophet or that Allah came over here in the flesh. They would cut his head off if he said that over there. I mean, he knows this.
At the rally on Sunday, he walked onto the ballroom stage at 3 p.m. and was greeted with an ovation. Gene Simpson, a reporter for WMCA New York and the only newsman to witness the assassination, was interviewed outside the ballroom shortly after the shooting.
I was sitting in the front row, right in front of Malcolm, in fact, and he came out on the stage. The introductory speaker turned over the platform to him. He raised his hand and a Muslim greeting, Salam Alaikum. At that point, I heard a rumbling behind me, and I turned around in my seat to see what it was. I saw 2 guys standing up, and the next thing, my next impression, it all happened very rapidly, as you can understand, is of the gunshots. And I saw Malcolm had his hand up. He said, stay cool, stay calm, or something like that. And just then, the gunfire went off, and his hand was up. I remember this. I turned around quickly, and the next thing I saw was Malcolm falling back in a dead faint. Right after that, chairs were being knocked over. There were screams. Everybody was in a mad confusion. I dove for the floor and scrambled behind a rampart on the side. My first impression was, of course, as a reporter, to get to a telephone and file my story. And I started crawling towards the back of the auditorium. And I incidentally saw a guy running out, evidently one of the perpetrators running out, and he was shooting like a cowboy all over the place. And, of course, the shots were going off wildly. And after that, there was pandemonium in the place.
He was asked how many gunmen there had been.
Well, I am told that there were 2. Mind you, I didn't see the perpetrator shoot Malcolm. I was looking at Malcolm when he was hit. I didn't see the person who was firing. I was facing Malcolm at the time the bullets went off.
After the shooting, Malcolm X was placed on a stretcher by police and, surrounded by his followers, wheeled across Broadway to the Vanderbilt Clinic of the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. A short time later, a hospital spokesman met with reporters.
He was dead on arrival, and they took him into the third-floor emergency room, and several doctors tried to revive him for about 15 minutes, and there was no response. They did all the emergency procedures that you would use in a case like this, and there was no response at any time, and he was pronounced dead at 3:30.
Later that day, Dr. Martin Luther King, who was leading a voter registration campaign in Alabama, remarked on the murder.
Well, I think we have to agree that this appears to be the result of an internal conflict within the black nationalist movement. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is for a conference of goodwill to take place between black nationalist leaders. This was why I suggested a few days ago that the followers of the late Malcolm X and the followers of Elijah Muhammad should sit down at the peace table together, so to speak, and discuss this problem and try to reach some understanding. Nothing can be accomplished by violence. It only leads to new and more complex social problems. I think it is unfortunate for the black nationalist movement. I think it is unfortunate for the health of our nation.
The following day, Elijah Muhammad, the 67-year-old leader of the black Muslims, denied that his followers had committed the crime. He said Thomas Hagen, the man arrested Sunday, was, quote, a stranger to us, unquote.
We had not, as I say, never resorted to no such thing as violence. Way I see it, Malcolm is the victim of his own preaching. He preached violence, and so he became the victim of it.
Asked about reports that associates of Malcolm X were on their way to Chicago to get revenge by killing him, the self-described messenger of Allah said, quote, I don't feel disturbed about that in the least. It is an unjust thing even to think about, unquote. On Tuesday at 2:15 a.m., the black Muslims' Harlem Mosque on the corner of Lenox Avenue and 116th Street went up in flames, apparently after a firebomb was tossed through one of its windows. The mosque was led by Malcolm X before he quit the black Muslims last year. One fireman was buried under rubble when a wall collapsed on the top floor and plummeted down to the sidewalk. He was rescued and hospitalized. Fire Department Commissioner Martin Scott was on the scene.
We're informed by the police who were around the corner that there was a muffled sound similar to an explosion, and that they looked up, saw the falling glass from the fourth floor of the building 102 West 116th Street, turned in the fire alarm. The apparatus arrives. They start to extinguish the fire on the top floor in the normal way. When they find the fire had rapidly spread throughout that meeting room. It was a large meeting room of the Muslims. Parapet and side wall at the Lenox Avenue side fell out when the roof fell in and did damage, considerably damaged two of our apparatus, Ladder 40 and Engine 91. But the fire marshals and the detectives of the police are presently interrogating members of the Muslim group and other persons who might have some information concerning the fire.
This afternoon, Dr. Martin Luther King, wrapped under heavy security guard, arrived in Los Angeles for several engagements. He was asked how the Negro population at large felt about the conflict between the Nation of Islam and the black nationalists.
Well, I think the general feeling in the Negro community is that this is very unfortunate and that we have such large problems to deal with in getting rid of racial injustice that it is both impractical and immoral to be fighting among ourselves.
He was asked if there was a present threat to his life.
Well, I get threats quite often. This is almost a daily and weekly occurrence. I mentioned in Selma just the other day that I had received information from reliable sources that there would be an attempt to take my life, and that there was an attempt when I was in Marion, Alabama, which is in Perry County, about a week ago. But at the time, I was surrounded by a number of people, and I was never clear enough to be a target.
Dr. King was asked to articulate his attitude toward the possibility that he would be assassinated.
I think this cause is right, and because of my deep feeling about the rightness of the cause, it gives me consolation to carry on. And I think that one has to conquer the fear of death if he's going to do anything constructive in life and take a stand against entrenched evil. And I go on with the view that one who has not found something so true and so meaningful and profound that he will die for it is not fit to live. So that I'm prepared to face anything that comes in standing up for this struggle with the great belief and the great feeling that unmerited suffering is redemptive.
On Sunday, former Senator Barry Goldwater advocated more U.S. bombing raids in North Vietnam. Appearing on the ABC program Issues and Answers, the 1964 Republican presidential nominee said President Johnson should order airstrikes even at Hanoi, the North Vietnamese capital. While Goldwater admitted that China and North Vietnam might send ground troops into South Vietnam in response, he said they could be defeated by a combination of South Vietnamese troops and U.S. air and naval power. Turning to domestic politics, Goldwater said former Vice President Richard Nixon, quote, stands head and shoulders above everybody else in the Republican Party, unquote, and he went on to predict that Nixon would be the party's presidential nominee in 1968. Meanwhile, several Democratic senators are calling for a negotiated settlement to the Vietnamese conflict. George McGovern of South Dakota said his mail was running 15-1 in favor of such a settlement, adding that victory in Vietnam appeared impossible. However, a statement by the Senate House Republican leadership said there can be no negotiations as long as there is communist infiltration of South Vietnam. Yesterday, former President Harry Truman issued his own statement supporting the Johnson policy in Vietnam. I'll have more news for you after this message.
Now you're looking for a watch with a price that's low, and you see a beauty. Sparkles like diamonds, shines like the sun, and everybody's admiring. Admiring to a T. Well, brother, that T stands for trouble. Trouble, brother, trouble, not time. And time is what you're buying when you're buying a watch. And when a watch costs as little as $10.95, you ought to ask questions. Otherwise, you got trouble, brother.
Well, you won't have trouble with Belfort, companion watch to the world-famous Benros. Prices start at $10.95. Unbreakable mainspring, shock-absorbing, anti-magnetic. And there's a great variety of ladies' and men's styles. Buy Belfort.
So if you're looking for a watch with jewels and a price that's low, remember the letter B. B means better, and better means Belfort.
Here again, Joe Rubenstein.
On Friday, Academy Award-winning actress Patricia Neal underwent brain surgery at the UCLA Medical Center after suffering 2 strokes. Her condition was described as critical. The 39-year-old actress had arrived from England just 2 weeks earlier to begin work on a John Ford film. Miss Neal's first stroke came at her Beverly Hills home a few hours after she left the set on Thursday. The second came after her arrival at the medical center. Tragedy has played a major role in the life of the Kentucky-born actress in recent years. In 1962, the eldest of her 4 children, Olivia, died of measles at the age of 7. And her 5-year-old son, Theo, has been under doctor's care since his baby carriage was struck by a taxi in New York in 1960. During much of the time since the accident, the child has been blind. The latest statement from the UCLA Medical Center, issued Monday, said Miss Neal remained in critical condition. Later that day, MGM announced that Anne Bancroft would assume Miss Neal's role in the John Ford film. On Thursday, James Baldwin, the Negro writer and civil rights activist, opposed William F. Buckley, editor-in-chief of the conservative National Review, in a debate at the Cambridge Union Society in England. A crowd of more than 700 were packed into the chamber, which is modeled after the British House of Commons. The debate was broadcast live by the BBC and taped for later airing in this country. Baldwin, who spoke first, affirmed the motion that, quote, "the American dream came at the expense of the American Negro," unquote.
We're speaking about expense. Let me put it this way, that from a very literal point of view, the harbors and the ports and the railroads of the country, the economy, especially of the southern states, could not conceivably be what it has become if they had not had, and do not still have indeed, and for so long, so many generations, cheap labor. I am stating very seriously, and this is not an overstatement, that I picked the cotton, and I carried it to market, and I built the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing. The Southern oligarchy, which has until today so much power in Washington, and therefore some power in the world, was created by my labor and my sweat, and the violation of my women and the murder of my children. This, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and no one can challenge that statement. It is a matter of historical record.
He then referenced some current leaders on the American scene.
I remember, for example, when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said that it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. And that sounded like a very emancipated statement, I suppose, to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday, and now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president. What is dangerous here is the turning away from anything any white American says. The reason for the political hesitation, and in spite of the Johnson landslide, is the one who's been betrayed by American politicians for so long. And I'm a grown man, and perhaps I can be reasoned with. But I don't know, and neither does Martin Luther King, none of us know, how to deal with those other people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says, and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. And one can't blame them.
Buckley, while acknowledging the need to eliminate racial discrimination in the U.S., disputed the notion that Baldwin himself had been poorly treated in this country.
You cannot go to a university in the United States, a university in the United States presumably also governed by the Lord Spiritual, as you are, in which Mr. Baldwin is not the toast of the town. You cannot go to a university of the United States in which practically all other problems of public policy are preempted by the primary policy of concern for the Negro. I challenge you to name me another civilization, anytime, anywhere in the history of the world, in which the problems of a minority, which have been showing considerable material and political advancement, is as much a subject of dramatic concern as it is in the United States.
He went on to assert that Negroes in the U.S. should take greater advantage of opportunities that did exist.
I urge those of you who have an actual rather than a purely ideologized interest in the problem to read the book Beyond the Melting Pot by Professor Glaser, also co-author of The Lonely Crowd, a prominent Jewish intellectual, who points to the fact that the situation in America where the Negroes are concerned is extremely complex as a result of an unfortunate conjunction of two factors. One is the dreadful efforts to perpetuate discrimination by many individual American citizens as a result of their lack of that final and ultimate concern which some people are truly trying to agitate. The other is as a result of the failure of the Negro community itself to make certain exertions which were made by other minority groups during the American experience.
The motion, led by Baldwin, won by a landslide majority, with the ayes receiving 544 votes to the noes 164. In Santa Monica, California yesterday, comic actor Stan Laurel died of a heart attack. He was 74 years old. Laurel and Oliver Hardy, who died in 1957, were the most successful comedy duo in movie history, teaming up in more than 200 films, the last of which was released in 1951. However, Laurel never stopped getting fan mail from all over the world. His continuing popularity was due to frequent showings of Laurel and Hardy films on television. However, Laurel derived no income from these reruns. He and Hardy had worked for a flat salary and were left empty-handed when their work continued to bring in millions. In recent years, Laurel had been confined to a small apartment overlooking the Pacific. He received a small pension from the Screen Actors Guild. In a recent interview, Laurel said, quote, "It's been a great life, and I'm happy that I've made people forget some of their sorrows. It would have been nice to have made a little money along the way, but I'm not complaining. I've got all I want in this little apartment," unquote. He is survived by his widow, Ida. Sports, right after this.
Help the hearts you love by giving now to your Heart Fund. Remember, more will live the more you give.
The world champion Boston Celtics nearly allowed a 19-point lead to slip away tonight, but their 97-95 conquest of the Lakers before 14,656 LA Sports Arena fans clinched at least a tie for another Eastern Division title. The Celtics have finished first in the East for 8 straight seasons and have won a record 6 consecutive NBA titles. Bill Russell, the team's all-world center, scored a season-high 24 points tonight, 11 in the final quarter, and Sam Jones, with 27 points, broke the all-time Celtics scoring mark of 1,742, set by Tom Heinsohn 3 years ago. And that, for this evening, completes our look at the latest news on this Wednesday, February 24th, 1965. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day tomorrow.
This has been your Evening Report, a roundup of the latest news with Joe Rubenstein.